So now we're going to turn to the business model of the future, where sustainability is embedded. I want to introduce CSR expert and a great friend of business in the community Ireland, Mallen Baker, who will firstly quickly do a roundup of the workshops and then guide us through the last panel session.
I've been asked by Business in the Community Ireland to sum up in 5 minutes the assembled wisdom from all of your sessions, so what could possibly go wrong? I'm always fascinated by grey areas, and this exercise of dilemmas, of course, is an exercise in exploring grey areas. Grey areas, dilemmas, they are the real test of your values, because it's easy for you as a company to have values and stick them on a poster on the chairman's wall. They only get tested when there's no obviously right answer as to what you should do. So it was a fascinating exercise, having spoken with a number of businesses who have done some very impressive things all day, to then go off and sit around the table and to contemplate a number of slightly difficult scenarios and to ask, what would we do in that situation? And also to take different roles in doing it. And I've wandered around 2 of the 3 groups myself just to get a flavour of what was going on. I was deeply impressed on how seriously a lot of you threw yourself into these roles. Like I say, quotes that I've got were things like, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? Thankfully, he doesn't have a vote. Got quite heated, it did. And of course, it's interesting, isn't it, that the customers and the media don't get a vote when these discussions happen in real life. But of course, in real life, often they don't get a voice either. And one of the interesting questions raised by the exercise is it the job of the corporate responsibility team, or however they're embedded throughout the company, to actually find the voices so that they're represented? Because it's probably right that these people don't have a vote per se, but those who feel the consequences of decisions should have some sort of voice, because if nothing else, you want to be able to make well-informed decisions. You also noticed, I was aware, that when you're presented with options A to D, and options A to D are all quite difficult, it's always very easy to come up with an option E. Did you notice that? I once read I remember reading as a kid some Pulp Fiction thing where at the end of the episode the hero was in an unscalable pit with certain doom descending down upon him. Join in the next exciting episode, and next week you join in on the episode, and the first sentence was, with a single bound he was free! And you were thinking, what a lazy bloody writer that was. I think some of your option E's were kind of the single bound he was free options. And it's worth noting that in real life, quite often option E also has downsides. So I thought the exercise that Business in the Community put together with these dilemmas was brilliant. I love these kind of exercises. They empowered people to think through, from a different point of view, some very common problems, and I think everybody got a lot out of it. So well done to BITC for that exercise. Come on, I'm not going to spoon feed you these lines, You've got to... Okay. Now, this kind of segues us very nicely into the discussion that we have to come. Because the nature of the dilemmas is that there are some difficult decisions. Sometimes the things that will improve environmental impact will have a negative impact on profitability, for instance. And of course, one comment that somebody made from the exercise was, yes, it's easy to be ethical in a test environment. And it's certainly true, of course, that when you don't really feel the pain of some of these decisions, yes, of course, it's easy to say, oh, well, of course, it should be option B. Ultimately, we need the sustainable companies to be the profitable ones. Because if the unsustainable companies are, through dint of being unsustainable, more profitable in the short term, that sends absolutely the wrong market signals, and of course, the unprofitable companies win out. So it's about finding those solutions that work with things the way they are rather than the way that we'd like them to be. And ultimately, it's about finding new business models, because at the moment, the market as it is, and the market has worked in creating wealth throughout a period of human history unparalleled to anything we've ever seen. But nevertheless, the market has perverse incentives when it comes to sustainable outcomes. And all of these companies enjoy those perverse incentives the same as everyone else, which is why it's going to be particularly interesting to hear what they've got to say. And the ultimate perverse incentive is that the more you sell, the more profit you make, obviously. And if you make your profit by taking one kind of raw material and transforming it into a higher value-added product, and in the process of doing that create emissions and other certain negative impacts, then it's about finding business models where success in the marketplace is actually going to reward you by being more sustainable, not less. So you have companies like Interface who are exploring whether they could turn their carpet product into a service, where they made more profit the least amount of material they shifted rather than the most. You've seen some energy companies thinking, can we change the model so that we make more profit the more energy conservation there is? But that's a very difficult model. These are dilemmas. So I'm fascinated to know how our speakers are going to talk about the new business model, sustainability embedded at the core. None of them have cracked it, because I don't believe that we can point to any one company that has arrived at the wholly sustainable business model, but we know we're on that journey. And we have some companies to speak to you today who are further along that journey than some and have a lot of fascinating lessons to teach us. So without further ado, let me introduce our speakers. We have Carmel McQuaid, who is the head of sustainable business for Marks & Spencer. Marks & Spencer, of course, have already received high praise several times today, deservedly so. Her particular focus has been working with NGOs and industry partners to drive mass market sustainability in supply chains. We're then going to hear from Tom Browne, who's the Group Chief Executive of Friends First. Tom has been with Friends First since 1990, holding several operational roles prior to becoming Chief Executive. And then finally, we're going to hear from Geoff McDonald. Those of you who were here for the breakfast this morning will already have heard some of his impressive thoughts. He's the former Global Vice President for Human Resources of Unilever. He was at Unilever for 25 years, so that's a reasonable stretch, I would say. He now focuses on getting companies to particularly focus on purpose and well-being. So can I invite Carmel, the first of those speakers, to take the podium? Thank you.
So I was invited here to share some learning from Marks & Spencer, 130-year-old company with a legacy of doing the right thing by its stakeholders, be it employees or the community, over the years. And the circumstances of what doing the right thing means has changed over those years, as Sheila said. You know, it evolves, it changes, it adapts. So we have that in our DNA and legacy, and that's great to have in your back pocket. But in 2007, we took a view that actually we needed to do much more. We needed to make a concentrated effort, a really serious, significant effort as a business to be a truly sustainable business. And we knew it would take time, and we knew we couldn't leapfrog to it because we're an existing company. We don't have the luxury of being a startup on the north coast of America with a blank sheet of paper and just starting from scratch. We had an established business. With an established business comes responsibility as well. Sometimes we don't spend enough time thinking about that. We have 80,000 workers who rely on M&S to meet their livelihoods today. So we should be bold, we should innovate, but we must do so in a responsible way. We can't take option E and hope for the best, and then when it doesn't work out, go, oh my goodness, what have we done? So I almost refer to it as, imagine your mum has a really precious vase from your great-great-grandmother. The natural instinct, and that precious vase represents trust and goodwill in your business. The instinct could be to lock it away in the press at the bottom floor of in the sitting room to make sure it doesn't fall, that no one brushes by it, that maybe your jealous neighbours don't decide to steal it because they covet it. And that's actually what some companies that have a good reputation of trust and goodwill are tempted to do. It's a bit scary sometimes to put your head above the parapet and to say, this is what we stand for, this is what we're going to go after, because someone in the public domain will come after you and try and shoot you down. They'll be waiting for you to make a mistake. You have to involve more people when you take that vase out of the cupboard and put it into the sitting room. You've got lots more people running by it. It might topple, it might get chipped. How are you going to repair it and make it still survive another 130 years? So that's what I'm really here to share very briefly with you, some of our experiences over the last 7 years in how we're trying to embed sustainability into the core of our business so that ultimately we can transform to be a truly sustainable business. And let me just reassure you, because it's been a really great day and somewhat sobering at times, and that's great because we need to think about the significance of what we're trying to do, and we can't always be too glib about how innovation can transform everything. So I think that's great. But let me just reassure you, doing this is way more fun than doing business as usual. Don't get me wrong, it's hard and it's tough. But boy, I get a bit upset when I hear people talk about millennials. I want some of that fun. I want a career with purpose. I want to reinvent business. I'm not old. None of you are old. And that's one little plea to you. I hear too many senior business leaders kind of go, it's all over to the next generation. It isn't. This is your generation, your role, your career. You can make a massive difference. So M&S, for me personally, it's been way more fun than anything else I could have done. And for our business, it's been successful. We're not fully there yet, but we're already returning 145 million to the bottom line in additional business benefit from doing the right thing. We're attracting talent like no one's business. So, at the end of the day, we're a shop, and we're getting some of the brightest people coming to join our business because they're excited about our purpose and what we can do. And it's helping us be fit for the future. Remember the dilemma experience. Unfortunately, life doesn't give you a year to think about a decision. You're going to be exposed to new changes rapidly all the time. And the more you practice, the more you spend time with your stakeholders, be they customers, employees, or the NGO community, the better you will be prepared to realize quickly what the right decision might be. So there are some of the benefits we've seen. How have we gone about doing it? And I think there's 3 challenges you come across when you try to embed sustainability into a mainstream business. The first is, and I can't remember which of our speakers, I think it was Lloyd mentioned this morning, we're operating in these VUCA times, volatile, uncertain, ambiguous. As soon as you think you know what you're doing, the whole landscape changes and you're having to reevaluate all over again. And that makes it quite hard in a big business to try and get people pointed in one direction and get traction and get going. So there's no point moaning about it. That's how life is now. That's how business is. So we had a plan in 2007. We've updated it 3 times. It's only 2014, but we've had to significantly adapt it and change it. And that means you've got to always keep on the front foot. The second challenge you have when you try to embed sustainability into a core business is, I love the phrase from this morning, organizational culture trumps strategy every time. I remember when we first had plan A, this is our plan A, 100 commitments, these are the things we will do. But actually, you're relying on the people in the canteen, in the stores, in the supply chain, the farmers out in the field, actually being bothered to do that and understanding why it was important and doing it, and I think it came up time and time again, doing it when under pressure, whether it's time pressure, whether it's cost pressure, whether it's during the recession, whatever the circumstances, they still have to execute your strategy. And that means, as a business person, again, it's a bit annoying. You don't have all the power. You can't say, make it so, and suddenly it is so. You need people to understand, to get behind it, and to do it. And people are not robots. I'm sure you all know it's everyone's different, and we have to find ways of engaging with different people. The biggest personal learning I've had is that those people you think are your biggest barriers, and they could be many, and they may be in the supply base, they may be in the commercial team, they may be the finance director who rebuffed you in the first time you had a conversation. Their skills are usually the ones that you need to crack the real solution. So in many of the dilemmas we were playing in the last game, actually it was often a commercial person who found, let's call it option F, because option E was the one you think at the top of your head. Option F was often the best answer, which we came to maybe 6 months later, maybe a year later after we had that first initial conversation, but someone actually thought, I understand now what they're trying to get. Their current idea is clearly stupid, often mine. So I remember a packaging technical packaging manager where we wanted to move from plastic to recyclable packaging, and technically we could do it, it would cost a lot of money. Quite rightly he said, no, it's not the right thing to do. At the time, many of us thought, why are you holding us back on all our environmental thing? Why can't you get with the program? Haven't you read Plan A? He was right, because a year later, he came back with a much smarter solution, way lower cost, easier for the supply chain to adopt. And actually, the net result was it got rolled out much more mainstream. So the people that are hardest to engage often are hard to engage for a good reason, because they've identified the obvious answer isn't the right one, and taking them on the journey has been quite important. And the third challenge that you come up against time and time when you're trying to embed it into an organization is you don't operate in a vacuum. If Marks & Spencer was the only retailer in the world and we could have all the supply chains all to ourselves, my job would be so much easier. And we recognize that we operate in a global marketplace, and me telling a supplier I want higher standards with no one else doing that, guess what the supplier has often said? They've said, cheerio then, we'll sell to this other customer. So recognizing that you need to work with others and you need to collaborate and you need to change the system at times has been quite important. So we've had 3 iterations of Plan A. The first one was, I'm going to kind of crudely categorize them to make it easier in this short time I've got. It was obviously all mixed up together, but let's say the first version was really when we changed our relationship with our stakeholders. And that was about welcoming and listening to the NGO community. To Sheila's point this morning, starting to anticipate what are the things we're going to have to deal with in the future. Any of you who've been through the dilemmas, I hope you have a bit more empathy now for retailers when you think of the diversity of issues we face in food and clothing, the number of countries we source in, the sort of issues today and issues of the future that we have to tackle. So actually being in touch with our NGO community was really important. And actually just having that conversation really matters. So once a year we invite them in, we have an open conversation, probably twice the number of people that are in this room. We put our exec board on the panel. Interestingly, people always complain that there's not enough women on the panel. And I will always repeat and say, you want the executive directors of the company who are responsible on the panel, not a nice pretty picture of a diverse workforce, because actually if you're going to have a serious conversation, it's with the directors. So we do that, we have open conversations, and what's great about it is our NGO stakeholders are also learning that actually there are dilemmas, conflicts between the different issues that they're interested in. So version 1 was very much about having a technical plan, building lots of governance, building advisory boards, making people sit across from auditors, because if you're in a grown-up business, that's what grown-up business is like. And if you believe sustainable business is important, then it has to feel like grown-up business. Version 2 really took it much more into the supply base and making it easier for our suppliers to see that what we're doing, what we say we want to do, is reflected in how we work. And I know some of our suppliers are in the room, so they can validate this. But in terms of building it into our balanced scorecard and then incentivizing our buyers to consider, if you've got 2 suppliers, all things being equal, and one is higher sustainability standards, then there's a question why you wouldn't give the business to them. And that's validated because the higher sustainability standards has meant our suppliers are better prepared for the future. Our third version is really about the hearts and minds of the business. So this is my M&S badge, in which I used to get into the office. This represents for me the left brain, the rational, logical approach of how we drive this into our business. This is the heart. This tells everyone we enhance lives every day, and it describes that we do that with our values, of which integrity is a core part of that. And then it outlines what each individual does as an individual, as a team, and as a leader. So that's our next big push, engaging every single person, driving it to the core value and the purpose, and really trying to go a lot faster. And there's lots more I could say, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of how in a mainstream business we try to embed it so that ultimately we will be a truly sustainable business. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Tina, for the invite to speak today. I'm the only Indigenous speaker among all these fabulous worldwide brands, which so be it. I don't know how the recession was for all of you guys, but the recession was truly awful for Friends First. The Friends First group has seen 2 of its core companies bite the dust. We had a lending organisation and we had a wealth management organisation. And I don't need to explain to you what happens to those type of industries in the recession we've just had. Our life company is the only remaining company we really have. So I wince a little bit every time I see the word group chief executive. I do like it, but it's a little bit redundant at this stage. Even our life company, though, has been very severely affected. Our sales volumes are down by 2/3 in only 4 years. So that level of reduction, it's unseen in our industry. We're not unique. All of our competitors have seen a similar reduction. But it puts huge pressure on your organisation in terms of what to do next. Friends First tends to fly under the radar a bit, so I'll maybe do a little commercial. A lot of people have talked about how old the companies are today. Our company actually started in Ireland in 1834, so I've been listening carefully all day, and we're the winners. We're around for 180 years. We were started by the Society of Friends. That's where the name comes from. Society of Friends are better known to all of you as Quakers. We fished in our own roots for most of our existence. We're not so fussy anymore, so we will offer policies to all the saints and sinners in this room and beyond. We have a 6% market share, so we're a mid-market player. Size of our balance sheet is 4 billion euros. Every year we collect about €500 million in premiums, and we pay policyholders about €500 million. So we're in a stable sort of situation. €500 million is 10 million a week. It's a sizable amount of money. We have 270 staff, and we're based in the Cherrywood Business Park, right at the end of the Green Lewis line, for those of you who'd like to visit. What's perhaps unique about Friends First is that we do all of our business, 100% of our business, through brokers. So we've no direct sales to any end customer. We rely on brokers 100%, but they are independent, so we can't control them. If they don't like our products, they go elsewhere. So that puts the challenge up to us all the time to make sure our products are leading edge. All of our business therefore has 3 parties involved. And you'd be familiar with the expression, 3 is a crowd. But actually, we believe independent brokers normally result in the best outcomes for end policyholders. They've expertise, they've education, they're impartial, and they can access all of the products in the market. So we like them. I would say that, wouldn't I? The reason I want to stress that is some of what I'm going to say now may sound like I'm criticising the broker channel, and that's absolutely not my intention. We do believe they are a very valuable part of the financial services industry. Brokers, before the crisis, were paid in a lump sum at the start of the policy and low commissions every year thereafter. So they got all the money normally when the policy was sold. And if you think about the P&L then for a broker, it's a very simple P&L. It's commissions in, less operating costs give you a profit. So you can think very quickly about how a 2/3 reduction in sales impacts on the P&L for brokers. And we've seen huge damage done in the financial broking sector in the last few years, especially at the smaller end, the SME end. Lots of brokers have had to leave the industry, lots of consolidation because it just became too difficult to survive. Life assurance finances. We would need years to explain that to you. You'd need an actuarial qualification. So I'm just going to try and sum it up in one word. I hope there are no actuaries in the room. They'll be disappointed. Life assurance, the key driver financially for a life assurance company is how long the policy stays in force. Typically, we need policies to stay in force for 6 or 7 years. If we reach that break-even period, the company starts to make a profit. If the policy leaves before that period, we start to make losses. So that's our key metric. Can we keep the policies intact that long? If you listen to that, for brokers and for Friends First, there's a big difference there. Brokers make all of their rewards at the start of a policy, and we're at the other end. We make our rewards at the end of a policy. Big mismatch. It's a mismatch that's been there forever, though. We've all tolerated it. It's never been a problem while the economy is doing well and lots of new sales are happening. But as soon as the recession hits, we have 2 impacts. I've explained earlier that brokers see their sales volumes go down and all of a sudden their financial model is in trouble. I'm sure if I asked you all a question, which of you over the last 5 years have looked at your bank statement and seen direct debits go out to insurance companies and thought, do I really need that? Or can I pay less? Can I shop around? For us, that's very bad news if you're doing that, because it turns into bad cancellation rates. And our business starts to get into difficulty. And at the height of the recession, we would have been losing money because our cancellation rates had got so high. We'd moved from losing 6% of our portfolio every year to 12% of our portfolio every year. We're losing more policies than we're adding. It's a slow death. Debt is probably the wrong word. We will always have enough money to pay existing policyholders. But for us, the debt would be that we have to close down to new business. It's no longer worthwhile staying open for new business, and you go into a solvent runoff. And that was very much on the cards in 2012. So if a boxing referee had looked at our organisation in 2011, I think he would have stopped the fight. I took over in 2012. And yes, it felt a bit like a hospital pass at the time. But I went to our board and I indicated that I didn't think the usual Friends First way of handling these sort of things was appropriate. The usual way, which had taken us through 180 years, was to just muddle through, tinker around at the edges. It'll be all right on the night. Things will come back again. And I couldn't see that that was actually going to happen very quickly. Now, it looks as though I was wrong in that regard, but at the time in 2012, I thought we were going to be facing quite a long recession, and we needed to tackle our problems. So I agreed with the board that we would do three things. We would change our reward model for our brokers. We would reduce the level of commission we would pay them at the start and pay them more on an ongoing basis. And we'd also strip away any other rewards we gave them for sales. So volume overrides, soft commissions, marketing supports, all of those things would be removed. And we would focus on retention rewards. We also agreed that we would take all of that money that we saved and reinvest it back into the broker channel to make them better business people. Not to tell them more about our products, but to actually make them better business people. Because we're dependent on them, and we need them to thrive for us to be successful. We're not going to have a sustainable business if their business isn't sustainable. So that was close to $500,000 of investment back into the broker channel. Whether we do that every year, I don't know, but we certainly have done it for the last few years. The other thing we decided we would do is we would take a risk that that was going to be good for the longevity of our policies, and straight away we cut the premiums for our new customers. Internally, though, we made two very important cultural changes. We'd all got ourselves into a mindset that the broker was king, and we needed to challenge that sacred cow, and that's something that we said to our staff, we need to stop that now. We raised the customer, the end customer, up to the same place as the broker. So we've two customers now, both of equal value. Getting rid of that sacred cow has actually been remarkable in terms of the release of energy it's brought. And it's great to see the ideas now coming through from our staff once they know we're being brave and we're tackling sacred cows. And the last thing we did was we said, we won't hold back. We're going to be brave. We're going all in on this. So every action we did thereafter was on the basis that our strategy was going to be successful. Yes, we had a plan B, but the plan B was kept in a drawer somewhere, never looked at. There was no hesitation about what we needed to do. We continued to develop our staff, send them on training programs. We invested in our IT, in our online position. So everything that would be consistent with us believing we were going to succeed. We do have a plan B. I hope never to take it out of the drawer. The fact that I'm standing here today will obviously tell you that the plan has been reasonably successful so far. We went to our brokers in the end of 2012 to explain our shiny new strategy. We're going to reduce your commissions. Now, remember, many brokers are already struggling with their commission volumes. So we're going to be cruel to be kind. This is for your best interests. It'll work out well in the long run. Some of those conversations were very short. Get stuffed or similar words. But a lot of people saw that when we were doing that alongside training, investment in their business model. Not investment in our products, but investment in their business model. They took that on board and they said, this company is really walking the sustainability journey with us. We care about them surviving in the long run. Our results in 2013, our sales volumes went down by 20%. We actually expected our sales to go down by 40%. So many, many more brokers than we expected took on board the message and have gone with us on the journey. Our retention rates, I spoke earlier that our cancellation rates had gone from 6 to 12. They're already back now to 7.5. We may get them back to 6 again. That would be great. The results so far are very positive. We're absolutely not out of the woods, so our sales volumes are still 2/3 of what they were a few years ago. We need the economy to improve, though, for that to resolve itself. But at least now we know that all of the business we sell has a far greater chance of lasting. We have a far better chance of being in profit. So, working well so far. My takeaways from what I've seen in the last few years, the old cliche, never waste a crisis. So, we've taken the opportunity to make changes to our remuneration model while everybody could see that it was daft. So that's been good. We have been very brave and been all in. And I think that's very important. If you're hesitant when you're saying to your staff you're being brave, they will immediately smell a rat and they won't support you. They won't go the journey with you. So while you can have your plan B, I think you've got to execute on the basis that plan A is going to work and do everything that supports plan A. They'd be my main takeaways. I think it's also interesting to see how manufacturers investing in the business expertise of retailers can pay dividends. It doesn't necessarily pay first-order dividends, but we're getting an awful lot of goodwill and positive feedback from the people we've supported. So I'd encourage manufacturers in the room maybe to think about that a little bit, that supporting their retailers may actually pay them benefits in the long run. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I know you thrashed us on the rugby field on Saturday, so you can be very vociferous and energetic about that. But Mallen, you threw me when you introduced the session, in that you used Interface as a wonderful example of a company that has truly transformed its business model. And I thought to myself, well, has Unilever really done that? And the answer to that is probably no. Probably no at this stage of the game. So I think Unilever, yes, would always be an organization that is about selling brands. But I think it was Lloyd who said this morning, maybe that's shifting to something different, which is about selling an experience. Selling an experience, or becoming an organization that doesn't want to be the best marketing company in the world. It wants to be the best marketing company for the world. And maybe it's an organization which is beginning to shift from marketing to consumers to mattering to people. And maybe those are the shifts that are beginning to take place in the way in which Unilever does business, which is allowing it to fulfill its purpose of trying to make sustainable living commonplace in the world, where in 2050, 9 billion people will live on this planet in a sustainable way. And Carmel, I love the way that you say, well, maybe it's for another generation. And the younger generation or yourself want to be very involved in this challenge of making sustainable living commonplace and allowing for 9 billion people to live sustainably on the planet in 2050. The sobering thought is the following. Our generation is the first generation to truly feel the impact of climate change. And we are the last generation to be able to do anything about it. So as Unilever over the last 4 years has kind of resurrected its purpose of moving from making cleanliness commonplace in people's homes to making sustainable living commonplace in people's homes, what have been the lessons on that journey in trying to truly embed this into the core of the business? The first lesson for me has been one of taking that purpose statement and translating it. Translating it into goals and objectives that will truly drive growth and profitability through the brands, products, and services that you sell. So translating the purpose into a set of goals that through your brands and your products and services, if you achieve those goals through your brands, you will grow and you will be profitable in a responsible and sustainable way. Lesson number one. I see too many purpose statements just left on the wall. And then I ask, well, how are you measuring your progress towards that? And how is that purpose driving growth and profitability in your business? Lesson number two, I think, has been around, and I think it was Geoff this morning who said, it's so important to take your purpose and really drive that into the infrastructure, hardwire it into the organization. Because you might have a wonderful charismatic leader who advocates for a more purposeful way of doing business, but when that leader disappears, it could all fall over if it's not embedded into the infrastructure of the organization. And what do I mean by that? Is it in the strategy review process, the way in which you're going to make sustainable living commonplace, for example? So have you changed, or have we changed the strategy review process, and looked at it through the lens of sustainable living? Have we looked at the way in which we'll appoint senior managers through the lens of whether they did business in a new way of doing business in Unilever? Or will we appoint and promote people who do business in the old way? Where is it in the performance management system? Has that been reviewed through the lens of your purpose? Has the innovation process been reviewed through the lens of the purpose? Has the brand strategy and how you go about developing the strategy of your brands been reviewed through the lens of purpose? Has the supply chain and the way in which you recycle or hopefully not waste water or do your packaging, has that been reviewed through the lens of your purpose? And so building this into the infrastructure, the systems and the process, as well as into the way you organize yourself. So in Unilever, one of the first things that we did as we resurrected this purpose was we brought marketing, communications, and sustainability all together. Couldn't have somebody talking about sustainability on one hand and then marketing brands completely differently on another. And that required a huge shift and a change in terms of the capabilities that we expected our marketeers to have. And so there's an organization piece in this, and there's also a governance piece. I think it was Geoff who said, is your plan, is your purpose, is it audited on an annual basis? And do you report like you report on your earnings? Do you report on the progress you're making in terms of achieving your purpose? So those are some of the lessons that I've learned in terms of building it in and really trying to embed by using infrastructure as a tool. And then finally, the other lesson has been probably, well, I think building it into the infrastructure has been my most difficult experience. But maybe it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, and that is about leadership advocacy. That is about having leaders in your business who are prepared to be agents for change. And to change to what? To change to a form of capitalism which is different to what we've got today. You see, capitalism over the last 100 years has been great. Growth has been good. There are less poor people in the world than there were 100 years ago. There are more people in the world who can read and write. We have come across the most amazing advances in medical science over the last 100 years. However, in the last 10, capitalism 1.0 has eroded all of our trust. Financial scandals, other business scandals, open the newspaper, and you'll get some sort of scandal at least once or twice a month. Capitalism 1.0 hasn't taken into account the environmental limits and the boundaries that this planet has. And it's led to inequality. It hasn't improved the levels of equality. There are 80 people in the world who earn the equivalent of 3.5 billion people. 3.5 billion people out there. There are kids dying of diarrhea as we talk. It's a preventable disease. Doesn't need drugs, just needs to teach a child to wash their hands. So I think there's a new form of capitalism emerging, a more conscious, a more caring form of capitalism. A form of capitalism where all stakeholders benefit from the value that the business creates. And are your leaders advocates for that? Have they come out of their comfort zones and experienced the world as we know it today? As Lloyd said, VUCA. And to move leaders from just being aware of this stuff and understanding it to become true advocates and agents for change is very, very difficult. There's nothing easy about doing that. If it was easy, we'd all be on this road together and we'd all be achieving amazing things for the future generations to come. And then finally, and it's been said already, don't underestimate the importance of culture. And somebody said to me 2 years ago when I did a speech at the BSR conference in the States around sustainability, yes, this stuff's been around for 20 years. Why have we made no progress? And my answer to that was, we have all these wonderful strategies, but we've done nothing. We haven't put the same amount of energy and effort into changing the culture that will support that strategy. And so if you want to go down the route of trying to embed purpose or sustainability into the core of your business, 4 things to remember. 1, has your purpose been translated into a set of goals and objectives that you will achieve through your brands and then grow and be profitable? 2, have you really built this into the infrastructure of the organization, from your performance management system right through to the recycling system that you have in your factories? Are you working hard to create leaders of the future? Leadership 2.0, where leaders are more conscious and caring about the role that business has got to play in society. And then finally, don't underestimate culture. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Geoff. So we're going to have a quick discussion. I've got a couple of things that I'd like to use to kick off that discussion, but if at any point you've got a question that you'd like to add, if you start to wave your hand so I can see that there are questions, then I will make sure that I give way to be able to take yours straight away. But I'm particularly interested that we've got 2 of the leading companies on the platform at the moment who, in my mind, have done what many, many others struggle to do, which is getting together their corporate responsibility people and their marketers. Because by and large, marketers think corporate responsibility people speak Martian, or actually they think they speak Venusian, and the CR people think that the marketers speak Martian or whatever. But both of your companies, Unilever and M&S, and maybe Friends First, you can let me know on this, have brought together how you think about marketing, how you think about customers, and also your core of a sustainable sort of business model future. So a starting question for me comes down to, what do we need to do to take the customers with us? Because I guess 5 to 10 years ago, lots of people pinned their hope on the rise of the ethical consumer. And they were saying more and more people were caring about what they bought and so on. actually the ethical consumer hasn't really delivered. It's a thriving, healthy niche, but it hasn't changed from being a niche. And there's all sorts of grey areas and dilemmas where doing the more sustainable thing might mean going faster than your customers and leaving them behind, which of course can be catastrophic for you, as for instance Iceland found when they went all organic and suddenly found their customers weren't prepared to go there. So what do the two of you do, and maybe the three of you do, in terms of taking your customers with you? How can you influence your customers' buying behaviours to be more sustainable? Carmel, do you want to kick off?
I'm really glad you brought up customers, because I think it's wrong that we don't talk about customers as much in these debates, because customers are people, they're us and our families, and they have as much of a voice in this whole debate as does the planet and the issues that we talk about. And I think we start with, when we go back to our core purpose, enhancing lives every day. That's what we're about as a business. It's why we were formed. We bring smiles to people. We cheer them up. That's kind of what we're here to do. And you need to have that mindset. For M&S in particular, we need that mindset, because as soon as we allow ourselves to be distracted and think the customer is wrong, we need to change the customer, that's not the right territory to be in, as we all know, because many companies have tried that and failed. And if you lecture to customers, and if you try and make them feel guilty, and if you try and make them be educated about all of the issues on all of the topics all around the world, that doesn't achieve anything. So why keep doing it? So I'm quite excited about the new movement, and there's more and more people joining on board, which is about, if we're about making people's lives better, then we just need to find different ways to give them what they want. And our 20-plus shopper, there's a certain profile, actually loves shopping, and that's okay. That is fine. That's what she enjoys it with her friends on a Saturday. Our job, my job, and my marketeers and my finance team is to find a better solution that means she's not wasting clothes, that the clothes come from sustainable sources, that we fully close loop them. That may mean a rental model, but I have to find a way to deliver it to her in a way that's exciting and engaging the way the current model is. So that's what I think you mentioned earlier. We sometimes jump to option E, which is let's just tell her not to buy clothes every Saturday. And that's the lazy solution and doesn't get what we really need to do. Now, how do you practically do that? Because it's all very well thinking about it. We're starting, we have a long chessboard in our head of that's where we ultimately need to get to, and we've got lots of pieces around the chessboard moving towards that. There's stuff we can do today without lots of engagement of our customer, which is about making the supply chains better. We're on it. We're driving that as fast as we can. We can start to learn about taking clothes back. We've got our swapping scheme. We've recruited Joanna Lumley to be the ambassador, to be the common touch point with the customer about how when you don't want something, give it back, have it a second life. We're innovating like crazy, not necessarily in the core business, but on the outside with experiments about how we satisfy the needs of this customer, but in a more sustainable way. So yeah, I think putting the customer at the heart of it and thinking about how can you still satisfy them, enhance their lives, while still delivering all the sustainability agenda is important. And I know Unilever have been doing a lot on that as well. And
Geoff, I mean, you made reference to my reference to Interface and their experiment in changing the business model around. Of course, what I didn't say was that their initial experiment in trying to turn carpet from a product to a service failed, because even business clients, business customers, weren't ready for a model where they rented something rather than owned it. We all want to own stuff. So clearly, these experiments are going on, but they're not always working. Are there areas where Unilever, I mean, you've already talked about trying to change customer practice in terms of getting kids to wash their hands, and that's a change of behaviour that requires education and requires all sorts of things going on. What are the main challenges for you about the areas where you need to take customers with you in order to get the better outcomes that you're looking for?
Well, you've answered the question for me, because the most significant challenge, particularly in the developed world, less so in the developing and emerging worlds, is shifting consumer behaviour. So I can give you a shampoo that will rinse very, very quickly. But if it's a cold day and you've been out for a run, you're going to spend 10 minutes in the shower. Even though I've given you this lovely shampoo that only requires you to spend 2 minutes in the shower. And so for me, the real challenge, and I mentioned it earlier, I think it is about how do you create this paradigm shift where your brand, your product, or your service truly, truly matters to people. You see, I think that we are inundated day after day with so much data as consumers or as people, whether it's a Twitter feed, whether it's a notification on Facebook, whether it's some ad, but all of this data just comes to us all of the time. And the challenge for the marketeers is to bring data to people that really matters to them. And I'll give you an example of that. An example of that is a brand called Dove. Now, last year, we ran an ad with Dove, and it was called Dove Sketches. And if you haven't seen it, go onto YouTube and have a look at it. But that ad was the most viewed ad in the history of mankind. 275 million views. Why? Because it mattered. When people saw it, particularly women, who, by the way, the insight around women in the world is that 96% of them don't think they are good enough. 96% of women don't think they're good enough. I see it every day with my wife and my 2 daughters. But that ad and what Dove is trying to do is mattering to people. And so if it matters, then I think we have a chance of changing and shifting the behavior of a consumer. But I don't think there's enough stuff out there that truly matters to us. And so therefore we ignore it and we don't shift our behavior.
Okay, Tom, do you want to add anything? I have another question for you if this isn't one, but
It's going to be hard.
they only get harder.
We take all of our business through brokers, so we don't necessarily have a direct relationship with customers. Our products are strange. They're essentially a promise to be around when you really need us. Yes. And I think what we have to work on in terms of making our products top of the broker's list is to make sure that he has confidence that we will be there, that we will always deal with his customer in a way that can never reflect embarrassment back on him.
So I suppose my follow-up question to that then, which obviously is going to be a really easy one, this. Good. You trust me, don't you? Your product is being represented in the marketplace then, all via third parties. And of course, times have been tough, so the incentive for those brokers to sell is absolutely sky high. How do you maintain a sense of values in terms of honest selling to people who genuinely need a product when the pressure's really on? How do you manage to make sure that those third-party brokers are representing those products in an honest way, in the way that you would want to if you were selling them yourself?
A very good question. Very hard question. There have been suggestions that a lot of the sales that happened in the crisis were actually what we call rebroking. So people reselling an old policy simply to add new commission into their P&L account. Our approach has been to try and educate brokers as to the sustainable model, that this isn't what they should be looking to do. Where we see this happening among our broker supporters, we actually eliminate them from our panel. So we've taken a very tough line on any brokers where we can see policies that are being simply resold year after year. But we do have to trust our suppliers. We give them a degree of trust that I think is reasonable given their education. They are a regulated entity. It's not that there's a free-for-all out there. And we have to trust that the regulator is also keeping a good eye on what they're doing by regular spot checks. It's in the news a lot at the moment, and I think the regulator has yet to issue a finding that you would say is negative about the broking community. They normally do their job professionally.
Okay. I'm looking to see if there are any questions out there, so just wave at me if there are. I think there's a hand up over there. Can we jog a microphone over to them? Run like the wind. Thank you.
Hi, this is a question for Geoff.
Can you say who you are and where you're from?
Edel Brophy, Bank of Ireland.
Thank you.
I'm glad to say I think I'm in the 4% of women who does believe in myself. For all the women in the room.
Woo!
Thank you. Just interesting to hear what you say on your third point in terms of leader is an advocacy for change, and obviously they're a change agent. But who do you think should own the corporate sustainability mandate?
I think that stumped him.
I always knew there was a powerful woman behind every successful man. But I think the mandate should be owned by the CEO. The reason I'm hesitating to answer is that I think we have to be careful that we don't put too much power into that person's hands. But he or she really does need to be that shining light, the advocate, similar to Rose in M&S, who is a real agent for change, is prepared to be courageous, go out on a limb, tell the analysts that you are not going to give guidance, and do things that will make them unpopular. However, it can't just be rested in that one individual. There needs to be the systems, the processes, and the infrastructure in place so that when that person moves on, his or her legacy is maintained.
And there's a challenge here, isn't there? Because we've got a couple of businesses on the panel who are sustainability leaders who have got or had leaders who have attracted widespread admiration for the quality of their leadership, whether it's Stuart Rose, whether it's Paul Polman. But if we're talking about a sustainable future and we need all businesses to follow a sustainable business model, presumably we need a sustainable business model that can survive mediocre leadership. Doesn't it? Because do we think that more businesses are mediocrely led or well-led? Open question. Do you think that can be done? Can businesses be sustainable with mediocre leadership? Obviously, you wouldn't recognize it from your own businesses, but you've seen it out there, surely.
No, I don't think they can. I don't think they can. I really don't. And that is my challenge. We can't continue with leadership 1.0, which in many ways, for me, has been mediocre. That it's led to the kind of world that we live in today. We need outstanding, courageous, systemic thinking leaders. And leaders who are going to put aside their egos, be less narcissistic, and be more caring and conscious about the world that they are creating. So mediocre leaders, for me, won't fit the bill.
Carmel, what do you think?
I think leadership is definitely needed, and leadership at all levels, because I think we spend either too much time talking about CEOs or we spend too much talking about young graduates. And there's a whole bunch of people, most people in business are in neither of those two camps. And actually, the poor middle managers, let's call them that, that's, if you see where stuff gets done in business, that's the level at which stuff gets done. And it's almost that same extent of a CEO can say stuff in the same way they say strategy, and people decide yes or no, will they be bothered to do it. And so actually I think you need an enabling CEO, and you need, I think that point about status is very important, and that was one of our learning points. We had a very outward-facing leader in Stuart Rose who launched Plan A. The great danger of that is the guy who has to follow him, which was Mark Bolland, could have said, well, that was Stuart's thing, I want to create my own identity. And that's one of the big challenges as business. Everyone wants their own thing, their one big program that they're famous for. And it actually takes a lot more courageous leadership to say, you know what, that program was right. I'm not going to fiddle with it. I'm not going to interfere it. I'm going to make it my own. I'm going to drive it forward to the next level. So that's needed. But also, we're spending a lot of time at the sort of the level below the CEO and the board of people who actually make most of the decisions in businesses, and inspiring them to think of themselves as a leader, which is why these go out to every single member of our staff, and everyone is considered to be a leader, and to think about what role they themselves can play, because everyone can play quite an important role.
So Tom, this is interesting from where you sit, I guess, because I mean you are the CEO at Friends First, and yet Friends First is a historic, values sort of driven business from before you were in that position, hopefully long after you've exited it, long in the future, though that may be, of course. What's your role in making sure that when you leave, those values don't leave with you?
My role is bringing on the talent underneath me, very simply. I don't want to be around for a huge number of years into the future. I certainly don't want to be around when we get to 200 years old. That's not my ambition. It's another 20 years away. We have to drive down all of these ideas about sustainability all the way down through our organisation. And we have done, because all of our charts, all of our scorecards, all of our goals and metrics all feature the sustainability metrics. How we're doing in the marketplace with customers, customer retention, how we're doing with employees, employee satisfaction.
So it's about starting to build in for the emerging leaders amongst their targets, sustainability
Absolutely.
criteria that they from that
Absolutely.
stage. Okay, any other questions that are out there? Wave your hands around. You know you're all going to want to. Yes, there's one over there. Can you say who you are and where you're from, please?
Hi, Niamh O'Carroll is my name. I'm from O'Carroll Consulting. This is a question for Geoff. I'm very interested in what you said about the 96% of women not believing or thinking that they're not good enough. And I'm just wondering, in terms of marketing, does that put a responsibility on companies to market to women in a different way?
Absolutely. And that is a global insight. That is a global insight. And that's why Dove is trying to do what it's trying to do. Enhance the self-esteem of women. And it is. Brands can be significant movements for change. And they should be movements for change for the good. So that we don't have that kind of insight and statistic out there. Brands can be movements for change for the good, and they should be.
How do you do when you're a sort of big global group and you have lots of different brands? And obviously, each of the brands will take its own identity and differentiate itself from the other. But I mean, Unilever has owned brands historically that market to women in exactly the same way that Dove is reacting against. So, and you know, you can't suddenly have a full portfolio of brands, all of whom take the same approach. How do you start to get some sense of a global values-led approach that can survive all those different brand identities?
So that comes back to what does making sustainable living commonplace actually mean? What it means is, in terms of 3 big goals, it meant improving the health and well-being of 1 billion people, reducing the environmental footprint, particularly in the area of water and greenhouse gases, by half, and ensuring that all raw materials come from sustainable sources, and in doing that, enhance the livelihoods of thousands of people in the world. Now, some brands play to enhancing the health and well-being. Lifebuoy, Dove. Persil doesn't. But what Persil does play to is reducing the amount of water that is used when you wash your clothes. And so what it has required has been to at least start with the 20 billion euro brands in Unilever and see which of those brands can build a purpose for themselves which either enhances the health and well-being of people or reduces the environmental footprint, particularly in the area of water and greenhouse gases, or enhances the sustainable sourcing of raw materials and livelihoods. So the 20 billion brands, we've tried to map those against those big goals. So you're right, not one brand can go after all of the brands, one particular aspect.
Okay, more questions? I thought there was one there, but he was scratching his forehead. So, yes, there's one over there. It's like an auction. You sort of scratch your ear and you can be forced to suddenly a microphone gets thrust into your hand. Yes?
Hi, Bridie and Carroll from the National University of Ireland, Galway. This is another question for Geoff. And Geoff, the fourth thing on your list of things was don't underestimate culture. And I wondered, were you referring to corporate culture or more, spatial, worldwide culture in different places? And I think we've talked quite a lot about the former, but if it's the latter, would you be able to talk about that a little bit more?
So yes, it was about corporate culture. Would you like me to?
Because I think we've covered that a lot today, this
Yeah.
idea of it needing to be embedded.
Yeah.
But I just wondered whether you were also saying that you need to recognise that business is different in different places, and that we need to kind of recognise spatial context and social context in different places. But you were talking about corporate culture instead.
Okay. Any more? We're nearly at the end. I have one last question, but we've got time for one more from the floor. There's a hand over there. The microphone is sprinting over to you.
Hi, Sophie Pig at KBC Bank. This question is mainly to Carmel. I really liked when you pointed out that, there's a lot of focus on the CEO as a leader, and then on millennials, getting the best talent in when we see what a company's doing. But that important big section of where the work is done, the management, that middle management, does Marks & Spencer do anything with regards to giving, I suppose, managers the freedom to get their staff involved, like some form of KPI or measurement, so that they then can say to their more senior managers, executive directors, or whatever it could be, that we've reached this target, so that it then allows, I suppose, the more junior people within that department or team to feel like, they're actually helping out their team by doing something, and not doing it, I suppose, in opposition to whatever key target they had to get done that week or a month. Thanks.
So if I give you one example from our second iteration of Plan A, which was in 2020, which was really the challenge we faced at that time, was we had a long list of issues which read very much like the Who's Who guide to environmental and social issues. We need to pay fair living wage, we need to tackle water, we need to tackle deforestation. And if I think about our fashion business, you had teams of designers, merchandisers, commercial teams in women's wear, men's wear, and they were looking at this kind of going, what can I do? So we made quite a bold move, which was around saying, let's move away from the language of the environmental life cycle assessment. Let's talk about every product must have one good Plan A thing about it. Now, behind the scenes, we made sure, as my team, we had a robust and credible list and process to say, this is the approved list of things that count. But we gave freedom very much to that entire department, if you like. We said every product must have a Plan A attribute by 2020. Over to you. You figure out which ones you want to do first. You figure out the phasing. You figure out what of that long list of things that you could have in your women's dress, which one you're going to go after. So they could then have a much more control back to them. Should they go for the factory first and ensure that the ethics are right? Would they investigate the dyeing? Would they think about it sourcing from better cotton? The real challenge, and that was phenomenal, because instead of me walking the corridors in Waterside, where our office is, banging on people's desks, my phone just kept ringing. And it was people who were incentivized and motivated, because it was also linked in. And it wasn't so much the bonus. Sometimes I think the bonus is overrated. Most people want to do something good at work. But now it was formally recognized, and they were phoning up saying, I want to get my department to our target sooner than everyone else, or I want to get there with this way that will win with the competition, or I want to get whatever way they themselves interpreted. And then they were looking for help, so they were phoning us for help. And I always remember the day I stood in a lift and I heard, the buyer didn't know me, she'd never met me, and she was with a supplier, and they were having a conversation about a jacket they were sourcing, and they were almost doing the deal. And she said, but you can get it in better cotton, can't you? Better cotton. And the lady said, well, no, not with that current factory, I'd have to source from another factory. And the buyer, just normal conversation, said, well, can you do that? Because that's part of our objectives, and I want to make sure that my product range has achieved its target. Phenomenal. That achieved more by giving power to the people and giving them some guidance and keeping all the rigor and robustness behind the scenes. We actually got way more traction than we could ever have done. And our suppliers have really embraced it as well too, because I think this whole level of how do you get trust in the supply chain. You can't have a checklist for everything with all the issues we have today. If you end up kind of issuing dictates and standards, you end up sometimes with a very paternalistic culture where people say, but you didn't tell me on a Thursday not to do that, so I did it. And you actually want people to think for themselves. And that's what really drives the change. I hope that answers your questions enough. Okay.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much indeed to you for your questions. Thank you to the panel for their answers. Can you join me in thanking them?
Thanks very much, Mallen. Thanks to all of our speakers. Just to sum up today, I think it's really important just to reflect on some of the key issues. One thing that's come up time and time again is leadership and the quality of it, and leadership having vision but also advocacy, so that it's not a plan or a purpose or anything like that, but it's how we live our values. That means extending corporate responsibility not just to our departments for CR, but right throughout the organisation around marketing and communications. Having measurable goals and targets has come up several times. But if you can get back past the technicalities, you know, it's really about honesty and transparency. And being the person you are outside work, inside work, so that the values and the decisions you take are informed by the person you are. And that what the organisation is recruiting for is people that have the same values. I think this came up time and time again today. I do think that it matters. It matters what you do, your services and products, it matters. So therefore it's important that we have products and services that do matter. I like the idea of the culture being caring capitalism, but I think it's actually more than that. I think it is about honesty and integrity. It's about having a business that encapsulates those. I think it is one of the things that we miss out on all the time is communicating what we do. I go into companies all the time and they have fantastic practices, but you wouldn't know it by looking at their communications. You wouldn't know what they were doing by looking at their communications, and often it's an easy win just to communicate what people are doing. Some companies say they don't want to communicate. They actually think it's better if they do it under the radar. I personally think that's the wrong strategy. And I try to explain that to them because your employees want to know what it is you're doing. Suppliers want to know, customers want to know, and if they don't know, they'll make it up. So it is so much better to be able to communicate in a real, honest way. All companies in Ireland need to look at sustainability. 98% of our companies are under 250 employees. So we are going to roll out a service now come January where we're going to offer a service for SMEs. So I'm really pleased about that. Our membership services team put together that fantastic lab today. And I just want to say, if you'd like that lab done within your companies and you're a member, please let us know because we'd love to do it with you. So for all of our colleagues in business, the community and the Community Foundation, I'd like you to give a rousing round of applause before we head out the door.